Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's a great pleasure to welcome Imam Taymullah Abdur-Rahman, who is an entrepreneur educator. He spent a decade as a chaplain inside high security prison and was the first paid Muslim chaplain at Harvard University, where he taught Islamic polity at Harvard Divinity School. He is the only Imam to serve as a Holocaust educator at Facing History and Ourselves. He is the founder of Spendum, a social justice mobile app available on all platforms. Let's hear from Imam, his achievements and contribution to society and the country. Please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Doctor. It's such a pleasure to be here. Ramadan Mubarak to you. I'm happy to be here and contribute to this very important dialogue and I guess discovery about all of the different iterations of Islam and types of Muslims all over the world, that Allah has blessed us with. So I'm grateful and honored to be part of this, I guess, this spectrum of belief. So I guess I would like to start by talking a little bit about my conversion. Before Islam, I was a person who was not religious, and, I was very confused, not really doing anything with myself, dibbling and dabbling, and I didn't really have any direction. But in 1999, I converted to Islam after a friend of mine went to prison, and inside prison, he converted to Islam. And he used to call me and talk to me about Islam, and I would tell him, no, no thanks. And about 7 years into his prison sentence, this is when I finally converted. I was going through some personal turmoil and struggles, very confused. I was fighting for custody of my little son. And after I won custody of him, I did win custody. I felt as though this was a sign from God and that I needed to be better for my child. And so I converted to Islam in 1999 and I began to learn about the religion. I traveled overseas in Saudi Arabia briefly and studied and got some certification in Islamic studies from Al Basira. And I came back, and believe it or not, I started working inside those prisons, the prisons that my friend was spending time in. So I guess what's unique about it, I remember my first day at prison as a chaplain, as an imam. When the gates opened and I saw all of the men, hundreds and hundreds of men filing, through the prison yard, I felt as though that this is where all of the men were in society, all of the at least Black and brown men, they were being housed. And I felt like it was my purpose. It was purpose driven, and this is where I should be. And so I spent 7 years inside a prison teaching Islam. But then I felt the need to, expand a little bit and expand my education. So I left prison and I went to Northeastern University, where I became a chaplain there. And I enrolled in a master's degree program because I felt two things: that the narrative around Jews and Christians in the community that I was in, it wasn't always healthy. And I felt like I wanted to explore myself. I'm the type of person that if I had listened to people about, what they thought in their opinion, I would have never become Muslim, right? And so I think it's important for us to have that experiential knowledge, that actually allows us to engage with the people and places that we've heard so much about, good and bad. And so I enrolled into a Christian seminary, actually, to get a master's degree in global interreligious leadership, Andover Newton Theological School. And there was some duality, because at the same time I enrolled in this Christian seminary, I also became an educator at a place called Facing History and Ourselves. And I was essentially a Holocaust educator. And so I was learning about the Holocaust and learning about the events and steps that led up to the Holocaust, and the Weimar Republic and the Third Reich and all of the stigmatizing that was going on and the marginalizing that was going on. And I recognized some of those signs. I mean, nothing is the same, but I recognized some of those signs, the dehumanization of human beings that I saw in the prison system. And so I was perhaps the only imam on the face of the earth at the time who was attending a Christian seminary while teaching the Holocaust. And so I found that a very unique part of my identity. And I attribute that to my mom, who converted to Islam along with me a few years after me. But she had always taught me, before you're any label, you're a human being. And so it was important for me to honor that narrative. And I learned so much about Christian theology, and I learned so much about comparative religion. And I used those tools. To build an identity based on inclusivity, based on being somewhat critical of the narrative that I've heard within Muslim circles around, the Jew and the Christian. And it really helped me to expand not only my verbal IQ, but also to take social emotional cues from the people that I spend time with, to judge people on how they are as individuals and not clump everyone together, rather than clumping everyone together into this monolith of, one-dimensional badness. I was able to, address people individually. One experience I had at the seminary, there were many different kinds of Christians, and one particular woman was a lesbian, and we went on a retreat to a monastery. We stayed at this monastery for a few days. And before we went to the monastery, there was a request. Does anybody have any special requests? And I said, I had my own room, but I said, I would like to request that if we have a shared restroom, that people be careful about their hygiene and take particular care to just be mindful that this is a shared restroom and that we keep it clean. It's very important in my faith that, these areas stay clean. So they all acknowledged it and said, okay. So when we got to the place, I got there late, and my professor told me that my professor and this woman, this lesbian woman, they had gotten there 2 hours before us. And she said that when the lesbian student who was in my cohort, when she saw the bathroom, she said, Taymullah is not going to be happy with this. Somebody give me a mop, a sponge, and some cleaning solution. And this woman got on her knees and cleaned and scrubbed the floor, cleaned the toilet, mopped the floor, cleaned all of it for me. She did it all for me. And what that did for me was, first of all, it humbled me. And it also made me not necessarily, now I'm going to be nice to her because she did something nice to me. I'm nice to everyone. But what it did was it opened my mind to the good works that all human beings are doing on earth, right? Everyone is doing good work to serve God and to serve most people, to serve God and to serve human beings. So, I'm able to, at this point, focus on my vertical relationship with God, with Allah, while also honoring that horizontal interpersonal relationship that I have to have with other human beings on earth. And I think it's so important that we move beyond the stale narratives that we hear on the news about Muslims, Jews, Christians, the LGBTQ community, and recognize them first and foremost as human beings. All of us are human beings. And I think if we look at that as the primary identity and we move from there, then I think you'll see a lot more, tolerance, and not just tolerance, but empathic behavior in the world. So that was one experience that really shaped me in terms of my thinking and in terms of my approach to human beings. And that was important for me. That was a learning curve for me. In addition to that, once I graduated from Andover Newton Theological School, I decided to leave Facing History and Ourselves because I felt like I myself had nothing else to offer. I learned so much. I spent 3 years there learning with professors and Holocaust scholars. I was certified in Shoah education. And I said, I need to take these tools back into the prison. And so I actually went back into the prison full time as a Muslim chaplain again. And this was, there was a 5-year gap. I missed that at the same time I was in Harvard. So I went, during that time I was at Facing History and Ourselves, teaching during the day. I would be at Harvard University, the first paid chaplain, I was at Harvard lecturing and teaching at Harvard Divinity School at night. So I was getting home very late. I would spend about 5 hours at Harvard University from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. every night, get home very late, study. And basically that was my routine for 5 years. And I spent 3 years, 2 or 3 years at Harvard. So after all of these tools I had gathered, this is when I decided to go back in the prison system. And what I wanted to do was, you know, when I was there before, I always said that I was more of a theologian. I was more of a theologian. I was very much the ideologue, very much constricted by my own, by whatever was in the books. I had no kind of idea how to relate to human beings and how to apply those rules in a real world, pragmatic way. So I wanted to go back into prison and kind of demonstrate and model a less caustic iteration of my Islam that I had been growing into. So I went back in the prison system in 2018. And it was beautiful because I was able to, believe it or not, I was able to teach so many indirect strategies about tolerance and empathy and how to apply, you know, how to learn the rules of Islam, but then how they work in the real world, right? And how to honor your relationship with God, with Allah, while also demonstrating the highest ideals that Islam has to offer. You know, we have a rich and wealthy history of not just tolerance, but accommodation and facilitation for people from other faith practices. This is the tradition of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so without sounding like a person who doesn't have his own principles and convictions, which I do, I think it's important to measure those convictions and principles by a yardstick that allows others to be safe in spaces that are shared, right? When you have shared spaces, you have to make people feel safe. It's not appropriate. And it goes against the magnanimity of Islam when we begin to, you know, impose our personal convictions on people. You know, all of us have a job to do the best that we can do to honor Allah's, his law on ourselves, beautify ourselves with it. But to impose that on other people is in fact a type of zulm, a type of oppression, you know, and this is something that is forbidden in Islam. So I went back into prison and I really, you know, I was able to touch the men in a really meaningful way beyond just religion. And we got into like how people are shaped by the narratives that they grow up in, you know, so everyone kind of takes on, you know, their emotional trauma, the social baggage that they have, the family, you know, history of whatever is going on in the family, whatever the family dynamic is. You bring that into your Islam. You bring that into your Christianity. You bring that into your Judaism. You bring that into the world. And so I think that, you know, the men in prison, some of which who are brilliant, they had never kind of indicted themselves and asked themselves the tough questions about, you know, why did I commit this crime? Or, you know, why am I behaving this way? Or why have I behaved this way in the past? An important theme for me is several things. The first thing, and this is from Brian Stevenson. He's a very, very popular an attorney. He just had a movie put out on him called Just Mercy. Great book as well. He talks about how none of us are as bad as the worst thing we've ever done. And I think that's an important narrative for the incarceration setting, that they have to know that they're human beings and they're three-dimensional, and that none of us are as bad as the worst thing we've ever done. You know, imagine, doctor, if you were to be judged by the worst thing you've ever done, and that's the only thing people judge you on. I mean, the whole world would be guilty. So, you know, I think there's a spectrum of understanding that we have to know that, okay, people have moments of indiscretion, some worse than others, and they have to pay their debt to society. But we shouldn't condemn them as human beings with potential to grow and potential to practice what we call restorative justice, right? Those types of things that give back to the community that they might have harmed, right? And so I want to talk about the principles that I learned through Brian Stevenson. Number one was that, and this is through him actually, he used to come to Facing History somewhat often and give lectures and talk to kids. And so I was really keen to take notice and take note to a lot of his lessons. The first one is that none of us is bad, is the worst thing we've ever done. The second thing is each one of us has a skill that no one else has, and that we have to get proximate to an injustice along the lines of that skill. So proximity to struggle is very important. Some people have to save the whales, right? Some people have to work for global warming. Some people have to write songs and poetry and movies and art that deal with real themes that help people. Some people have to deal with obesity and the epidemic with health and good eating and good living and wellness. Some people have to deal with many different issues. And so, if my issue was dealing with helping these men who are incarcerated, some of them for life, helping them to find their own humanity, then I needed to be proximate to them. And so I think those two important lessons, the first is that none of us are as bad as the worst that we've ever done. The second is that all of us have to be proximate to that thing that we can beautify with our hands and our skills and our talent that's been God-given. And I think that's what I wanted to let the men know. And we started so many social justice initiatives and restorative justice programs where they would try to give back to their community. And this led me to my work in decarceration. Decarceration is not really a word as it appears in the Western dictionary, but it is a word in social justice circles. To decarcerate prisons. What that means is to take a second look at the criminal justice system and be able to reevaluate and say, as Brian Stevenson said, he said, look, imagine after the Holocaust, after everything happened, if within the 75 years since the Holocaust, if the highest rate of incarceration per capita were Jewish people in Germany, that would be unconscionable since the Holocaust, right? Imagine in 2022, if the most people in prison had a Jewish ancestry in Germany, that would be unconscionable. The connection would be able to be made directly to Hitler and the machinations of the Third Reich. The connections will be able to be made. Now, we're not making a false equivalency and saying that, one or the other is more tragic or they're both the same. But we are saying that for Black and brown people to be incarcerated at the rates that they're incarcerated, considering the legacy and history of slavery and Jim Crow and the civil rights struggle and the 5,000 lynchings since the Emancipation Proclamation, we have to indict that. We have to investigate that narrative that says that it's a moral monologue, that Black and brown people are not, able to live up to the highest ideals and the best and brightest of the Western society, and say that it may be something based in the policy, right? And so, with that narrative, I'm able to work around decarceration, which is basically saying, let's revisit the sentencing rules in America. Let's revisit how men are being treated inside prisons. Let's revisit what it looks like to have a more holistic way, an organic way to repair these men, right? So that they would be able to, those who are re-entering society, those returning citizens, they would be able to really come home and contribute to the greater narrative of good citizenry and civic engagement and civil discourse. And so I guess that right now, that's my mission, is to be able to help decarceration and peacefully engage in those conversations that would lead to a more better understanding and enlightenment of, what prison life is really like and how the Black and brown families have been deeply devastated by the loss of their loved ones through incarceration. And that has led me to create an app, a mobile app. So during the quarantine, we were quarantined here for about a year, so to speak. It was during the time that the American Black man, George Floyd, was killed by police officers. And I watched on TV how the justice system was kind of skating around the issue. And then I watched how people took to the streets and began to burn things and flip cars over. And I thought to myself that perhaps there's a better way for people to engage in, politics, and usually like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he said that riots in the inner city are the voice of those who don't have a voice, right? So it's basically a cry out for help. We feel as though we're helpless, and this is the only way that we have any recourse is to take to the streets. So I wanted to, whether you agree with that or not, I'm not condoning it. I'm simply saying that as an observation, I noticed that this was something that was prevalent at the time after George Floyd. So I wanted to create somewhat of an intervention for that. And so I created a mobile app called Spentum, SPENTEM, Spentum. And it's available on Android, on iPhone. And what it is this. It is a social justice app that calls for rapid response activism. So instead of, you being frustrated or feeling isolated and alone, you can download the app from the App Store on your phone, go to the website, spentum.com, and basically sign up and upload a short video, not unlike TikTok or Snapchat. You just upload a video and you tell your story. You pick from 6 categories: discrimination, harassment, immigration, incarceration, service, or abuse. So say you're having a problem with your landlord, or you're having a problem at university from a professor, or you're having another issue that is preventing you from, you're feeling like you're being abused or harassed or discriminated against. Maybe you experienced discrimination in a store or against a business. You upload this video, and then essentially you tell your story. And then viewers are able to, instead of liking it or following, they can become allies. So they press an action button on their phone after watching your video, and they become an ally. And what an ally does is it's a way for them to say, okay, what do you want me to do? You want me to email a superintendent? You want me to call a landlord? You want me to call a university? You want me to meet you outside and protest a particular business? So it's a way for rapid response activism to gather those who are in proximity to your problem, or those who are outside of your problem. Maybe they're in another state, but they can still make a phone call and send an email and say that this is an injustice. We need you to rectify this particular problem. So it's a way to kind of, for my small contribution into the great narrative and arc of justice. So I'll stop there and see if there's any comments or questions you may have, Doctor.
It's really remarkable to hear these wonderful stories. I would like to ask you, what was the response from the government, authorities, and also the other communities in your place, maybe around you?
Response to what exactly, Doctor?
Yeah, this work, because you started from the prison, and then you are working with the community, and now it's with a new technology, all the things, So
yeah.
Response.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're not anti-government, we're not anti-law, we're not anti-police. We don't believe in violence. We don't believe in disruption. We believe in peaceful civic engagement, right? And so we're trying to teach that through the app. As a government employee, myself being a prison chaplain, I respect the professionalism inside the prison. The men are treated well. They're not mistreated. It's not a place of abuse and torture. But we just believe the policies that are in place can be better suited to suit the needs, to meet the needs of those who have been marginalized, the voiceless, those who don't have a platform. And we see this as the great interracial democracy, the great interracial democratic aspiration of 1865. We believe that this fulfills what we're trying to do, is fulfill a larger tradition of those people who have come before us, who have struggled for justice in the name of democracy and freedom. And so, we're not antagonistic against law enforcement or the government. We think it's best if we can work together, right? Work together to form a kind of rapport so that they can see their blind spots. And in fact, we can see ours, right? How can we better police our communities so that communities in the West that contain Black and brown people don't have so much violence, or they're not really prone to, having delinquency. So we want to work together with law enforcement and, the policymakers. And we've done just that. We've gotten some great things changed in terms of people who are coming home from prison. They've been able to get their licenses with no problems, get their driver's licenses back. We've been able to work on housing for them. We've been able to work on the sentencing structure. And right now we're working on getting them jobs within the government to actually help those who are returning home after they themselves have been incarcerated. So really we've had a positive response from the local authorities because they see that this is an effort that needs to be made. And I guess it's all about the modality. It's about how this effort shows up. We can be derogatory, we can be antagonistic, we can say horrible things about, those who are in power, but that's not the goal. The goal is to work with those in power and be able to come up with solutions that provide peaceful and practical ways that people can become better human beings and live better lives.
That's great, And another question that, in the time of this social media or the technologies, people are normally depending the famous medias. Maybe people will start a page or something in the Facebook or in Twitter or Instagram for the same purpose, So what made you think of making an app for this? Maybe competing with these giants.
Yes, doctor. I think that it was two things for me. The first thing was that I was quarantined, right? And so I realized, we were all on Zoom, all over the world. Everyone was on Zoom. So that made me started to think remote. What does remote learning look like? What does remote everything look like? And then the second thing, I know that no matter what field you're in, everything is moving towards, technology, phones. And so I said, I'm going to invest my money, invest my time. I contacted some developers. And I basically felt as though I said, okay, this is going to be something that may not take off immediately because of those giants, right? Those, TikToks and Snapchats. But I do think that anyone who has something that's authentic and who is sincerely engaged in trying to change the narrative, that if we're patient over time, it will change. And so, it's funny you mentioned that. The Aspen Institute, which is a great institute that that is for innovators and leaders and politicians all over the world to gather together. They've invited me to come and be a fellow. So I'm an Aspen fellow. I'm going this year to go and kind of rub elbows with those who are in positions to, help my app Spentum. So I'll be going there this summer, spending some time in Aspen at the Aspen Festival to be able to kind of explore what it might look like for the app to be backed by people who are able to make it do greater things than what it's doing now. So if anyone is watching this, we encourage you to download the app, tell your story, and get some help. Tell your story and get the help.
Yeah, that's great. How is the impact, after telling the story, how we can resolve it, and what is the ratio of getting resolution through this app?
Yeah, so right now it's just been launched. So we don't have any stories right now. We don't have any stories to tell. It just was launched last week. So what we're trying to do now is galvanize I'm galvanizing the reverends, the pastors, the rabbis, galvanizing their congregations to even know about the app. No one knows about the app. Obviously we don't have the money and the budget to get all of the ads and make all of the promotion necessary. So we have to rely on God at this point. We have to rely on Allah to do the work for us. We use our tongue, we put the effort forth, and then we rely on him and wait for his help. So I will tell you this, the measurable outcomes that we've had in the real world, meeting with politicians and advocating for returning citizens and advocating in different areas, I believe that that's very transferable. And we're going to see within the next year, we're going to see people using these apps in, unmeasured numbers. I really believe that. It's just a matter of people being educated about the app and learning how it works. Also, I just signed a deal for my second book deal. I have a book called 44 Ways to Manhood, published by the International Islamic Publishing House out of Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. That's my first book. It was published in 2018. But I just signed a book for my life story through Broadleaf Publishing. And so that will be coming out in 2024. And so I'll be talking about the app in that book as well. So I'm very hopeful that, in the next year or two, inshallah, God willing, as we say, that we're going to see people use the app for the right reasons at the right time.
That's great, So nice to talk to you, and especially getting this new information. And your story is very inspiring. I hope our viewers and all other community will be benefited with that, and hope we will have more opportunities future in together, inshallah.
Yes, sir.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you.